And with that, we are live for episode 96 of Trek Live. Anytime we can look at Star Trek differently or look at Star Trek rankings differently, I think it's going to make for a great show. So this is what that show is going to be. Before we jump into it, Bill, how you doing this morning?
Doing great. I love this topic. I love top five lists. I love Trek ranks. So they've kind of cornered the market on that a little with their great show over there as a podcast. But everybody does top five lists, and I love it. And I love this concept. I'm looking forward to doing like different spin-offs of this idea, like trying to guess each other's top five, this and that. I think we're gonna like sprinkle them in to the future as we move forward. But this is our sort of first show in that mini series that I think we're going to carry through the however long. So yeah, we're doing top five non-captain Star Trek characters.
Yes.
So that can cover a whole lot of things. We're eliminating captains because I think captains are in a category unto themselves, and we could easily do a show like this to rank the captains, which I'm sure we'll do at some point in the near future. So we're cutting the captains out of this for this topic. But yeah, just like Dan said, the way we kind of look at this is it's just a fun way to talk about Star Trek. To talk about, we're going to cover a whole lot of characters. That's one of the reasons why I like the idea of like guessing each other's, and on top of that, like obviously revealing our actual picks. It gives us the opportunity to maybe talk about even more characters than we would if we were just sharing our choices. I mean, I know, speaking for myself, it's really hard to narrow this down to five. I could easily go 10, 15 deep. So yeah, putting the guesses into play is a really cool way to expand that, list of people that we get to talk about, list of characters we get to talk about. So
yeah,
doing well.
It should make for a fun show. Stay with us, guys, because we're going to be trying to do get a graphic together. So kind of deeper into the show, you'll be able to see everything
on the screen.
At once. Yeah. So, yes. Before we jump into the main show, how's your rewatch going?
My rewatch is going well. I'm winding down season 1 of The Next Generation. I have 2 episodes left, Conspiracy and The Neutral Zone. Over the last yesterday, for the most part, I watched Symbiosis, Skin of Evil, and We'll Always Have Paris, which is kind of a mixed bag. I'm a huge fan of Skin of Evil. I think it's like one of the more underrated episodes of Star Trek. I know a lot of people don't feel that way. Although the poll results that I have up actually kind of encouragingly positive for me, since I like the episode. So I guess maybe it's grown on people over time. But we have an episode way back in our backlog, Death in Star Trek.
Yes.
Where we talk about Skin of Evil a good bit. We cover, we talk in depth about, we share our thoughts on like Tasha, the way the TNG handled Tasha's death, the way Deep Space Nine, Dax, and Voyager. No, Trip and Enterprise. And I think we even maybe talked about like it wasn't a death, but we might have covered Kes leaving a little bit. Spock, obviously, in the Wrath of Khan. But yeah, we kind of compare those situations and how the show's handled, doing that. So I don't want to go into too much detail there. I'd point you back to that episode because I think that was one of our better conversations. It was really, but yeah.
Yes.
What about you?
I just finished Balance of Terror, and what can I say that hasn't been said?
It's one of the best.
It's one of the best. I think it's TOS's like first, I think, top 5 episode. Ever. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's. I definitely would agree with that. If you're watching it in order chronologically, it's probably in most people's minds, I would guess maybe the Menagerie, maybe the Corbomite Maneuver, but I think it's the first one that is like in that conversation for top 5 episodes of the series, top 25 episodes of all of Star Trek, like upper echelon Star Trek.
Yep.
Yeah, the actor who played. We have Rob and Rick Everson in our chat. Rick, I don't think we've had you in our chat before, so welcome.
Welcome, Rick.
Rob is obviously a staple. He's here often. He's been a guest on our show, so welcome as always, Rob. Good friend of the show. Rob mentioned that the actor who plays Lieutenant Reese in Discovery, the tactical officer, was tweeting a little bit over the last few days, talking about how much Star Trek he's watched and what he has left, and he gave a little mini like rave about Balance of Terror. He obviously really liked it, which comes as no surprise to me. I think if you're a Star Trek fan, it's pretty hard not to love Balance of Terror.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm glad you thought that it earns its reputation. It's as good as people say it is. But yeah, it's definitely one of TOS's best.
Yes, I would agree with that.
One of Kirk's best too. Like if you were like looking for episodes that like represents why Kirk is on, like if you like put Kirk into a little
point to that episode.
That's a great episode to like showcase Captain Kirk at his best.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yep. All right.
Jump into the topic?
Yeah, I think we should jump into the topic. I think that I'm excited to kind of talk about this. I'm a little nervous actually because I feel like this is like almost how much you know a person by how much you know their ranking. So if I get one right, I would consider that a win. So yeah.
Absolutely, and Rob's asking, can we guess too in the chat? Absolutely, yes, we want you to guess too. Yeah. Especially, Rob, you certainly know us pretty well. You've been in Discord hangouts with us. You've been to dozens and dozens of our shows here on the stream. You've interacted with us on Twitter. You know what we. So I'm very eager to guess to hear what you think our top 5 lists look like. We're gonna cover our own guesses here first, and then we're gonna get into our actual list. So. Absolutely, throw down the gauntlet. Tell us what you think our lists are going to look like, and we also since this is the topic, I want to know what your list looks like. I know you shared yours on Twitter, and it's a great list. So throw it in here too. Definitely, and we'll talk about it. Anybody, if you're in the chat, Rick, Rob, anybody else who's coming, maybe joins us in a bit. We want to see your lists in chat too, and we're going to cover them.
Yes. Yep. I think I'll go first. I'm gonna guess Bills.
Okay.
This is me being optimistic here with my first. I'm going 5. Number 5.
Mm-hmm.
Trip.
Okay.
Yep. Number 4. Dax.
Okay.
Number 3. Data.
Okay. 2.
Kira.
Okay.
1. Mr. Spock.
Okay. We're gonna find out. I'm not telling you yet, but we're gonna get into it. Here in a bit. So my guess. Should I do yours now?
Yeah.
Guess yours. Okay.
Yep.
My guess is for you. I'm gonna say number 5 is Worf. Maybe. I'm gonna say number 4 is. I'm struggling with this one. 7 of 9. I'm gonna guess number 3 is Will Riker. I'm gonna guess number 2 is Spock. Maybe, and I'm gonna guess number 1 is Tom Paris.
Okay.
So we're gonna throw these into the chat for easy reference, just so people. This for me. You guessed to Kira. Bear with us for 1 second.
Yes.
Okay. Did I get yours right? Not get your list right, but in the chat, I threw what you said and what I said. I just want to make sure I accurately represented your guesses for me. before we get into the actual legit lists.
Let me try to get this up, export it for
Oh,
you.
okay.
Yeah, it won't have Bill's on there because I want to wait to compare and contrast.
Mm-hmm.
It will have mine though, so you will be able to see Bill. You're gonna have to either I can send it to you on
Fill
Discord,
in as
or
well.
or you can just catch up on the stream, or I'll just say it. I'll just say it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll make it work. But we have Rob guessing Trip and Tom Paris in Dan's list,
Okay.
and he's guessing Spock might feature prominently in, which are good guesses because I guessed that for Dan too, and Dan guessed Spock for me. Actually, no, I didn't guess Trip for Dan, which I might now be regretting. Rob might know Dan better than I. We'll find out. Yep. Rick, if you're still in the chat, I would love to hear, because I'm not, and I apologize if you did share yours on Twitter, and I'm scrolling by it and not noticing because there are a lot, and we appreciate it. I would love to hear your top 5 non-captain characters in Star Trek. And Rob, I would like to hear you talk about why you chose the way you chose. Garrick featured very prominently, which is a really cool pick. That is a popular choice. I'm reading Rob's tweet right now. Garrick, EMH, Kira, Tilly, Saru. So a Discovery top 5 list. 2 Discovery characters. I know you've been a big fan of Tilly since Context is for Kings, the first episode she appeared in, and Saru is obviously a classic pick already. Love your list. I'd love to hear, little log lines on why maybe some of those characters, why they speak to you. But yeah, this is definitely one of the more difficult things to do because you really could. I could certainly go, 20 deep, even guessing Dan's. Like I know there are a lot of characters that he's a fan of. That I'm guessing you would echo my sentiment that this could easily go 10 deep, 15 deep.
Easily.
And
I mean, maybe we can do an episode later on, maybe like because a lot of people do top 5. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of people do like 6 to 15, and I think that's I want to give those characters some love too. So
that's true.
I think mine are up. I think if you guys check the stream. If not, I'll rattle them off. Number 5, Trip. Number 4, 7 of 9. Bill was right on the money with that. Paris at 3. Riker at 2.
Oh, wow.
Spock, number 1.
Interesting.
Very interesting. And I think looking back, I tried to like rattle my brain to when we did this before. I want to say Paris was higher, obviously. And other stuff, but I think now after this is my second rewatch going through. I'm confident right now is my top 5. The thing is though, I think tomorrow it would be totally different. But yeah, that's mine. So we can kind of talk about, Bill was pretty he's pretty good, pretty on the money, at least with, top 4. I think Worf 6 for me. Dax 7, 8 probably would be. I don't know. We'd have to. That's another topic, but yeah, it's definitely close for me.
Yeah, I know. Just speaking for my own guesses for you, that top 3. I didn't get the order correct, but I felt pretty confident.
Yeah,
that would be in the top echelon. That next group, I thought for sure. I thought 7 would be in there. I thought Trip would be in there. I thought Worf would be in there. They're the ones that definitely were in the conversation. Worf, I know we've talked a lot on this show, especially in like season 1 of Discovery. There was so much emphasis from your end of things on how much you love Klingon lore and the Klingons as a species, and so much of that, Michael Dorn, like. Building that over the course of TNG and Deep Space Nine, he's sort of like the DNA of the Klingon in the modern sense. So I put him in and was struggling with is it 7 as a trip for that other spot. But I'm pretty happy with at least getting your top 3
Yes.
correct. That really your top 4. I had 7 as your
Yeah.
number 4.
Yeah. So top
But
4, correct.
yeah.
My guess for you, I guess I tried to think of the characters that had not were just great characters and great moments, but had great character development. I know that's really big for you, so I tried to get that in there as far as. And then my my Hail Mary was number 5 was Trip. I wanted to get an Enterprise character up in there, so that was my strategy going into why I guessed what I guessed for you.
Okay. Yeah. So do you want me to tell you my 5?
Yes, so I can update the graphic.
You can update it.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk more like one by one, cover each character a little bit, talk about why they're on our list.
Yep.
Okay. So you know me very well. You're like pretty darn right on the money. My number 5 is Trip.
Yes.
So you nailed that.
Okay.
My number 4 is not Dax, who is like right on the edge, like 6 or 7. My number 4 is 7 of 9.
Okay.
My number 3 is Data.
Okay.
My number 2 is Kira.
Okay.
And my number 1 is so. Not only did you accurately guess 4 of my 5, you had them in the exact right spot. So I don't know if I'm just too predictable or if you just you know my fandom as well as I do. Like so, well done. You're right on the freaking.
No, it's not predictable. It's a great list. It's just a correct. I gotta read.
It's just correct.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I think you hit the nail on the head with the character development factoring heavily for me. I love a good character arc. Yes. I like seeing a character start in one place and end in another, and have that line make sense.
Yes.
Have there be ebbs and flows in their development. Have be see ups and downs. I think the characters that I chose are some of the characters that have the most memorable arcs, and it all kind of depends on. Hey, look, I mean, there are characters that don't necessarily have that feature to them, that
right.
sense of change that I love just as much, really, on a lot of levels. For example, somebody like Dr. McCoy, as just like a fun, very human, very relatable character who I eat up every time he's on screen. But characters like that kind of get knocked down the list a little bit because they might not have the sense of an arc that some others do. So yeah. And the other thing that I did completely by accident, I promise I didn't do this on purpose, is minus Discovery. I didn't choose anybody from. Ask me in a few years, maybe when the show is over and some of those arcs are completed, and that exactly. Certainly could change. But minus Discovery, I have one from each of the pre-Discovery Star Trek shows, which was not in. Yeah, it was a happy accident. I noticed it after I was done, and I kind of like put my pen down and was done.
Yeah,
and I was kind of satisfied by that. And I was like, I'm not changing it. That's right. That represents the fact that I love all 5 of the shows on a pretty equal basis. And I don't have like heavy favorites as far as the series go. But it was not a mission that I set out to accomplish from the beginning when I was putting this together. So
right.
Yeah. What was
probably I struggled with putting Dax in there, but yeah, and a few others. Like I feel like you might have went maybe Discovery route, so I was toying with putting Michael Burnham in there. So it was tough to kind of nail down. It definitely took me a few revisions, putting a character in, pulling one out, just tinkering with it. But yeah, it's a tough thing to do for sure. When
It is.
you're putting down the cards and throwing down the gauntlet, like you say. It's yeah, you're drawing your mark in the sand for sure. So it's tough.
It is, and I can tell you just what you said at kind of the beginning. It's kind of like when you do this, you're guessing each other's. You're kind of testing your knowledge of the other person's fandom, and I definitely like to think I know you pretty well. You know, we talk a lot about Star Trek, about all kinds, but there's a sense of pressure to that for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
So I put some time into it, and I was thinking, and I second guessed myself quite a bit, and it's it was not easy. It kind of wasn't. There were some, like I said, the top three. I pretty much had a pretty strong suspicion we're gonna be there, but I was not comfortable with the order. I was pretty confident that maybe it was maybe shaking up since the last time we kind of talked about this in any kind of specific way.
Yeah.
But it was not easy by any means, and it took me quite a few times. Quite a few drafts, the cliche, writing it down, ripping it out of the pad, and crumpling it up, throwing it in the trash. There's a pile of yellow paper sitting next to me with guesses of Dan's list.
Yeah, and I think that what really factored into kind of the change up of my list, putting Spock number 1, was I'm going through TOS right now. I've been Snapchatting Bill, just mostly kind of about Spock and how Nimoy plays him. Like I'm watching it and seeing the little, looks he gives, the little changes in tone he does when he delivers his lines. It's just awesome. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, and I would agree with that. For one thing, I think, what you're watching now, I think you kind of said it, like our list could change tomorrow. Yeah. Our list would have been different yesterday. Certainly months ago or months from now.
Easily.
Maybe data's a few spots down or a few spots up, depending on where I am in the rewatch, what's in my head at the time. It's definitely, like a snapshot in time is what it is. And I would ask, Rob and Rick are in the chat, kind of sharing their lists, which we'll cover in a second. I'm going to read off Rick's with some really interesting choices that we have not named on either Rob's or mine or yours. But are your lists the same? Like, do you feel like your lists, guys, do you feel like your lists are pretty static? Like do you think they stay the same for the most part? Pretty comfortable that they would be steady as she goes, no matter what? Or if we were having this conversation next month, do you think your list? I'm certainly curious about that because I know mine would probably shift around. Rick's, just to real quick cover his before we kind of get into hitting each of our characters. Yeah. His top 5. He's got number 5, Saru, who I've seen a good bit of love for on the different lists I've seen on Twitter as well. He's quickly cementing himself as a classic Star Trek character. Number 4, B'Elanna Torres. Yes. Number 3, so some Voyager love there. Some underrepresented Voyager love, not characters that I saw very often on the top 5s on Twitter, and I love that you're naming them, Rick, because they are great. Ezri Dax, number 2, fascinating choice, and Will Riker, number 1, who factors heavily on your list.
Yes, that's a great list, Rick.
And Rob's, real quick, since it's here, he shared his 5 Saru, 4 EMH, 3 Tilly, 2 Kira, 1 Garrett. Got some Voyager, some Deep Space Nine, some Discovery. All over the board. Yep. So do you want to let's start talking some characters that are on our list.
Okay.
And we can kind of maybe talk about some of these collectively, because some of them, the bottom of our list and the top of our lists, are shared. We both have the same similar. Number 1, but the same number 5. Mm-hmm. So what made you choose Trip Tucker? Like, why is he a top 5 non-captain?
He just I think he is very relatable, and I find, again, you talked about characters being human. I find him very human and a very product of that time and in that period in Trek. And I also just love his engineering background as well. I love that. Yeah, it's tough to kind of put one thing, one reason why, but he just has everything for me. He has great story arc, character arc. He's very loyal to obviously Archer, and I kind of like that in a character, that loyalty. A lot of these characters have that in common.
Yeah, have an element
with
of that.
With their captains or whatever characters they're interacting with. But yeah, I think that when I think back to Enterprise, and one of the first things that comes to mind is the character Trip Tucker. So that to me kind of factors into he deserves to be top 5 for sure.
Yeah, I echo a lot of that. I think the key to his success and why he's on both of our lists is the everyman, the relatability factor. And I think specifically when you factor in the kind of mission statement of Enterprise was to kind of, Rick Berman used to say, it's like mud on the boots. People it didn't necessarily culminate this way,
Everyday,
in a real way,
collar,
but in his mind, people are wearing jeans, wearing boots. It's muddy, it's dirty, it's gritty, it's getting, they're closer to us than they are to Picard and Sisko and Janeway.
Yep.
And they're more relatable to us than maybe those characters are. They're not as perfect. They're more everyday people that are happening to be doing this in the very beginning of it. And I think Trip Tucker is the last surviving element of that idea. The Enterprise, for better or worse, I think, falls into the trap or falls into the comfort zone sometimes of being just another Star Trek show that happens to take place in the 22nd century. They're out there, they're doing their thing, and they fall into a pattern. And trust me, I love Enterprise. You know that better than anybody.
Yeah.
It's sort of, in some ways, it's kind of my Star Trek. But Trip is the one thing that is like steady the entire time. He is closer to us than some of those characters. He is that relatability, that everyman that the show was kind of striving for in its concept from the very, very beginning. And I love that he kind of validates that idea. So, and it's the way he reacts to things. It's when he's on an away mission, when he's on a landing party on a planet, he's wide-eyed. He makes mistakes. He does some of the things that he screws up. He
gets pregnant.
He's quick to he gets pregnant. He gets kind of lost in the moment and doesn't think about things the same way that the guys in the future in the 24th century would. He's naive and excited, and even the way, like, when I think of the way I like the Trip T'Pol stuff. I think the way that relationship is presented, even from his end of things, is very human and very relatable. Very down to earth. Like the way he kind of falls into that is typical of people. And there's some trepidation to it. There's some scariness to it from his standpoint. It's very warm at the same time. I just love the warmth of that character. He's impossible not to love. And there was a risk there, I think, too, having him be a Southerner, having him be one of the 3 main characters. There's kind of a risk at the early stages of the show. Oh, he's their version of Dr. McCoy, an echo of McCoy. He's his own character. So level of difficulty, place in the show, what he brings to the show, what he brings to the concept of the show. And I didn't expect him to make it, because it's Enterprise and there's so many heavyweight characters from TNG and DS9. When I first thought of who's going to make my top 5, thinking, I don't know if I can get Trip on there. He's got to be. I mean, I love him as much as anybody when I watch that show.
Yeah, to me, he's like he's the underdog of all underdogs. And I think that a lot of us do relate to the underdog. So, I guess we had to make room for him. So, I'm glad we did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I noticed, there's a common thread, 7 of 9. The thing that I love about Star Trek is that it's not just going to explore each planet, exploring space. It's exploring the humanity side. um, and in the identity side. And it's Seven is relatable to me because she is exploring her identity and all that. And I think that each of us are doing that right now too. We're trying to find out who we are, what we're doing in life, where we're going, and that to me is super relatable. And that kind of is why I have her on my list as well, because she's not just an awesome character, and she's also exploring like her identity and what it means to be human and that boring side of things. So I love it.
Yeah, and I think you took the words right out of my mouth. That lack of direction in life and not knowing where you're going and not even knowing who you are.
Yeah.
That's kind of an anomaly in Star Trek because of what Star Trek is. A lot of the characters that we get over the years are very content in what they're doing and are very sure of what they're doing. They're confident people, career officers.
The plan.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've been pointed in a given direction, doing what they're doing for decades, most of them. And there isn't that search for an identity from some of these characters in that kind of a way. Certainly Spock, who we're going to talk about, has a struggling with their identity and who they are and what makes up their person. Data is certainly a person who's trying to discover who he is and figure it out.
Yeah.
So there are elements of that, but 7 and 9 kind of boils that down to such a basic level of this is a person, no identity, has no idea who she is, and has no place in the world, and is trying to figure it out from square one, and needs to be raised like a baby does. And Janeway's the mom. That's such a unique idea in Trek, and it fits like a glove. Voyager kind of leans heavily into that idea from the beginning. That Janeway's kind of the mom of this crew, ragtag, people, lost souls that are kind of thrust into this situation where they have to be together and fight through the situation. So by the time 7 is on the ship and part of the show, Janeway's already been a mom in our eyes for the last 3 years. I mean, that's something that they lean very heavily into. Her really having to take that on in an even more profound and obvious way is an easy sell, and it just fits. It feels right that Janeway would be good at that, and she is, and would be successful, which she ultimately is, I think. So yes, and the thing with 7 as well, I think that made her make my list for sure, is that's another example with Trip that and that was certainly present at the time when that show was coming on the air. People saw the first pictures of her and were like, yeah, she's gorgeous, but come on, this is look at that catsuit, it's ridiculous. But very quickly the performance is so strong and the writing is so strong and what they're doing with the character is meaningful enough to overcome that. And it's sort of one of the last things I think about when I think about 7 of 9. It's not the surface level stuff, it's not the look, it's the character arc, it's the journey she's on, the struggle that she's going through, which I think was a big challenge. I think they made Jeri Ryan's life more difficult by making her look the way she did. To have to beat back that stereotypical thing that people were looking at, especially back then. So we have a lot of action in the chat. My dad's in the chat. I don't know if he's still here, but shared his top 5 list. Kira number 5, 7 number 4, Paris number 3, Paul number 2, which is a surprise, and Spock number 1. So yeah,
some surprises in there. Paris and T'Pol. Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's definitely number 2 is a big surprise for me, especially. And Rob and Rick kind of talking about Rick saying that his list tends to be static. He thinks his top 3 has been pretty solid for years. Saru is obviously a more recent addition, maybe bumped McCoy. Rob saying pre-disco, he thinks number 3 might have been Dax. Number 5 would have been Neelix, which is great. I think I remember that, Rob. I know we know big Neelix advocate and fan. That's awesome that he would be that high on your list. Rob says he's never been the biggest fan of Trip. He must admit he's growing on him. I think in the years to come, the more he watches Enterprise, the more he'll grow to love it. That certainly is a factor for me. Enterprise, the more comfortable trip becomes.
Yeah.
We must be over the moon. That Seven is coming back in Picard. Yes,
Yes.
no doubt about that.
Very much so.
Big surprise, big win. Rick saying he's a Trip fan, and yeah, going back and forth, talking about each other's list, talking about Kira, who's we're going to talk about here in a bit. This is high on my list. What about our number threes?
Threes, a little bit different, kind of different end of the spectrum.
A little bit different,
yeah,
different characters. Yes,
why Data?
About as different as you can get. Why Data?
Why Data?
I think Data is another one where the degree of difficulty I think is pretty astonishing. The idea of like a Pinocchio character, an android with no emotion, a robot. Like I think on paper when you read that, it's like really kind of silly, kind of goofy, and I think clearly an attempt to do something like Spock, but is actually kind of the opposite of Spock. Spock is a guy who's trying to bury the humanity inside of it. He's kind of running from that and doesn't want that to seep into his personality. Where Data has none of that and is
trying to pull that out.
Trying with every fiber of his being, like that's all he cares about. Is to capture some of that, just a little speck of that. Where Spock doesn't want to let a speck of that in. I love the spin on that. I think on the surface level, if you don't know Star Trek, you don't know about these characters. You go, oh, they're the two like they're the two that are logical and it's easy to lump them together and say, oh, they're the goofy like alien characters that have no emotion, but they couldn't be more different, really. At the end of the day, there's a great scene in Unification when the two of them. Yes, in Unification, there's a great scene with Spock and Data together, and they talk about that. They realized that difference and had a little conversation about it. And that's one of my favorite moments in all of but Brent Spiner's performance, like I said, with the degree of difficulty, having to show no emotion, but is something that is a big deal. And it never really occurred to me until I listened to the Mission Log podcast. It never occurred to me that those guys are convinced that Data does have emotion. Data does feel things, and that it's evident in his performance, Spiner's performance. Data just doesn't know that he does. Like Data doesn't have a point of reference. That Data can't process that's happening. He's unable to articulate it. He's unable to realize that in actuality he does feel things, and that just added another layer to the character. Years after I'd watched the show many times, and it gives me new things to think about when I watch the show. And episodes like The Most Toys, when the question is, does he pull the trigger at the end to kill his captor? And it's kind of left at a gray area. When you think about that, like I don't know, it gives me whole new things to think about. And I love that. I love adding new layers, years of fact, and adding. That to me, that goes to show that the performance and the character are rich enough and deep enough to allow for that, to allow for different people to have different thoughts and have them be credible enough to make for interesting conversations and interesting new things to look for when you watch the show. So did Data factor into your list at all? Like, was he cut? Was he somebody you didn't really think about? How does he sit for you?
He wasn't really someone I thought about. But I mean, now that you mention it, I mean, he is a strong character, but I don't think he might be 10 or 11 for me. Oh, wow. Yeah, he's just, I guess not as high as, people might think, but, yeah.
What made you, you guessed him in the exact right spot for me. Like, what made you think that he was going to be on my?
Again, it goes back to kind of the roots, kind of my strategy of kind of building your list was they got to have, a great story arc. And I think Data's is kind of underrated. It is kind of, up and down. It kind of jumps around, but I think that it's there if you look for it. especially with the dreams and again, like you said, where he's trying to constantly pull his humanity out. That's a constant thread through the whole series. So,
yeah. His arc is definitely an interesting one. Even into the movies with the emotion chip, he's got great scenes in First Contact where he's feeling a lot of things for the first time.
Yeah.
His scenes with the Borg Queen, I think, are really, really kind of awesome, like well performed, kind of gutsy stuff. Yeah. Yeah, his ending is not necessarily ultimately satisfying to me. I don't love the way that they handled that. That's another episode. That's another topic in our death episode back a few years ago. Data's death. But it's another one of the characters like Seven, like Picard, that we're going to get more of in the future with the Picard show. So maybe his arc isn't completely over. But yeah, I mean, he was pretty much a no-brainer for me. I've always loved him. I've loved the performance. I've loved, like I said, the spin on the Spock character, the creative way to kind of play around in the same sort of territory, but do it in a completely new and creative way. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think some of his episodes are the best in TNG. Like when I think of great TNG episodes, a lot of them heavily involve Data, Measure of Command, The Offspring.
Along with Spiner's performance.
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. What about your number 3?
Paris, similar to Trip.
Paris.
Yeah, he is very relatable to me. I love his character arc, and yes, Voyager does have character arcs and
absolutely
serialization, but I think this is one of those characters that I kind of loved from the very beginning. I like kind of redemption characters as well, and not just Trek related, but other facets of content or whatever, other TV shows, books. Definitely a redemptive character. I love that that's interesting. I think that's what appeals to me in a character, is that redemptive. So that's definitely heavily in his character. I think he's got everything. He's funny. He's he can be loyal at some points. And again,
sometimes he's not.
Yeah. Again, I talked about identity in talking about 7 of 9. Paris also this is kind of like a fresh start and kind of turning his life around. So he's kind of finding his new identity, so to speak. I feel like this is the identity episode, but yeah, I just love Paris. And these top 3, moving into the top 3, I think can be interchanged depending on the day of the week. So, yeah, Paris is my number 3 right now, today.
Yeah, I echo a lot of that. Paris just barely missed my list. He's somebody that was a tough cut. We're talking in that 6 to 8, 9 range, and it's because of his character arc. He's the poster child in Star Trek for like second chance people who are really easy. Like Tom Paris is like the classic guy that people just kind of write off and label. Oh, he's just a bad guy. He's nothing. Everywhere he goes, trouble follows. Nothing good comes from him. He's a bad influence on anybody around him. The last thing you want to do is associate yourself. And it's sort of the it's sort of the poster child for, like, in the right environment with the right people, the right fresh, anything's possible. And he's unique in that sense. I don't think there are other characters that Voyager certainly has a few. I think B'Elanna makes a lot of sense for Paris because she's kind of going through a lot of the same things, and they see a lot of that similarity between each other. But Paris it's such a prominent factor in his arc, and episodes that are about him as the show progresses, lean on that and explore that idea. And my favorite thing about the Paris character is that he's never perfect. Like they never completely redeem him. They never completely fix him. He's not the perfect guy. He makes mistakes. He's rebellious when he needs to be, and he doesn't always have the right answer. his instincts aren't always right on the money. You know, he is who he is.
Still Paris, even
and I think that makes him even better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not rewriting the person. It's not creating a new person. He's a person who's learned and evolved with his experiences and has learned from the people around him. Yeah, I think he's a huge winner and one of Star Trek's best characters for sure. Yeah, and I thought he was going to be your number one. I had him because I feel like in the past you've spoken about him in that kind of way where he's like the character for you.
Yeah.
But like you said, these things change with time. It's all a matter of like what you're watching, where you are in your life, and you know what's on your mind at that time. So I knew he was going to be a big factor on your list, and well deserved for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. We picked 2 first officers for our number 2 and a number 1, I guess, but still, I think it's also interesting that we did that too. I'll ask again, why Kira instead of why Data? But
Rob, kind of doubling back into the chat a little bit. Rob and Rick had a nice back and forth conversation about Kira, and Rob said it best. It's her arc. She has one of the best story arcs. The journey from a terrorist who had suffered a lot and had to fight to becoming an administrator and a world builder, fighting with her former oppressor. You know, that arc, you know, seeing her in Emissary and at the beginning of the show, how, you know, angry she is for all the right reasons. You know, she's the product of her environment and the product of her upbringing, and she's skeptical of people coming to her world and like administering, you know, and being overseers. They just dealt with that with the Cardassians, and now here the Federation is trying to impose, you know, a sense of order on Bajorans. So her skepticism of that, and then kind of seeing that evolve over time, and ultimately fighting alongside, you know, rebelling Cardassian, push back against the Dominion, like that. Seeing her get to the point where she could do that over the last 7 years is very satisfying, and she's just rich. Like there's so much depth with, you know, her relationship with Dukat, like the weird, you know, there's some weird like courting stuff from Dukat coming towards Kira that is like skeevy and disgusting, but the way Kira plays it is like is perfect. You know, her relationship with Odo, like the totally, you know, we're friends, trusted, you know, like seeing that evolve over time, the way they look at each other, see each other, is a kind of an underrated. You know, people talk about Trip and T'Pol, and they obviously talk about Tom and B'Elanna being like long running things that played out over seasons, and there's some elements of slow burn to those relations. I think back into the first and second season, so I love that element of the character. I just love the being that rebel, being a terrorist, you know, fighting back. A freedom fighter. We did a whole episode on freedom fighters, and we talked a lot about Kira back in the day, about a year ago. And she can do that, but she can do, you know, an episode where she's being courted by Odo in a 1960s Vegas holodeck simulation. Like she's singing on a piano, and like she can do it all. Like there's a real diversity to that character. There's a real like versatility is the word. To that character that isn't an easy thing to pull off. It's easy to kind of pigeonhole characters and say they do stories like this. They're in episodes that are kind of like where Kira is a rare entity. There's no limit to what you can do with her. And I think if you look at the first couple shows, you know, when Deep Space Nine comes along, if you're watching them, TOS, TNG, Deep Space Nine, you know, the female character offerings in some of those other shows, you know, Uhura is certainly a background character, not doing a whole. She's great for what she is, and certainly a landmark character in TV history, but not a lot of story there, and not a lot of character development there. You know, Crusher and Troy certainly have their moments, and there are things about those characters that I love, but not necessarily that versatility that Kira brings to them. So Kira is certainly, you know, right off the bat in the beginning of Deep Space Nine, they're like, wow, this is a female character who, you know, kicks ass, but and not in like the action sort of way, just a well-rounded, strong character that is rich and deep and a lot of things you can play with. So that was refreshing at the time. And she's easily one of my favorite characters, obviously.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. She's probably in my top 10. I think she's like you said, she's like the Swiss Army knife. She can, and then she can do it all. She pushes back against the female actress stereotype. I think of how the character is based and what they can talk about, what they can't talk about. So it's awesome,
right, especially back then.
Yeah, especially back then. So yeah.
Yeah, so she's in. I've always kind of had her very, very near the top.
Yeah.
That's one element of my list that's been pretty static. Going back years now, Kira has always factored pretty heavily towards the top of my lists. Favorite characters.
Yeah. So our number.
What about
one.
Your number 2?
Oh, number 2. Yeah, I guess I have to talk about Riker.
This is number 1.
Yes.
He is number 1.
He is number 1. I feel like I love Riker because he has that great arc. He has that kind of growing up type, I guess. But also he's, someone to kind of look up to. He, to me, is maybe the quintessential, Starfleet officer. He starts out his career. He knows what he wants. He goes through it, but also it gets complicated with women and family and all this other stuff. I love. He's very charming. He has lots of charisma. He just oozes charisma. People say, "What would Picard do?" I feel like I'm cheating, but this is what would Riker do, because I think he's one of the best kind of backups. You don't feel worried one bit, when Riker takes over. So I think, to me, that just makes up for a great character that I have to keep in my top 3.
Yeah, I knew he was going to be high on your. You've always been a huge advocate for Riker, and for good reason. He's one of my favorites too. I don't know where he'd fit on my list, but he's in the upper half for sure, up towards the top. When I think of him, I think of that sense of he's so career minded, especially when you meet him. Like, he's clearly a guy who makes decisions to like when you're early in the show, he's a guy who's presented with he's presented as a guy who, when he's presented with choices of like, do I do the thing that I want to do in my personal life, or do I go with my career? He always picks his career at the beginning.
Yes.
He leaves Troy behind, Beta Z, to go do his thing as a career officer. But he evolves over time, and he's presented. He finds his comfort zone on the Enterprise, whether it's partially maybe because of Troy, because of his loyalty to Picard, the comfort. But Best of Both Worlds deals with that in such a forward way. This is a guy who's kind of struggling with that. Do I keep going, making those decisions and sacrificing personal happiness and comfort to benefit the career and keep just making the right next career move, or do I do what makes me and that's Best of Both Worlds, we've talked about this before, always people think of it and they think, oh, it's the Picard Borg episode. It's the cutest, but it's really it's really Riker's story. The whole thing, it's forcing Riker into that command situation and getting a taste of it and the pressure of it, and realizing by the end of the day that he's in a good place. He's in the place he needs to be. Being second in command and growing as a person and learning from Picard and being around Troy and being around people that he's come to accept as his family. I love that arc. Seeing him go through that, and I think you said it too. The warmth, the charisma, is a really cool contrast to Picard. Picard can come across as a little curmudgeon-y sometimes, and very formal and very rich, at least on the surface. And Riker is sort of the opposite. He can be the charming guy. He can charm the pants off just about anybody. And operate on that level where Picard isn't necessarily as comfortable. He can go in and charm a room the way Picard might not be able to. So I love the counterbalance there. The 1-2 punch of those two characters kind of being a yin and yang kind of a situation, in the same way that Kirk and Spock kind of are too, but in a different way, kind of like the same way with the Data Spock dynamic, kind of charting the same territory, but doing really unique, fun, different things with that territory. I think that the Kirk Spock Picard Riker dynamics are different, but ultimately succeed in the same way, being that yin and yang. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. So our number one. Yeah. There's all kinds of good stuff in the chat that we'll double back to.
Yeah, I was just looking at that.
There's talk of 6 through 10 that
might be our next episode.
That might be our next episode. We may just have to continue our conversation and do our next list. But we'll cover initial thoughts on that and maybe do our honorable mentions here in a bit. Yeah. But let's talk about Spock real quick. Our both of our number choice. Why Spock? Like what for you? What? And how early in the process did you put him at number one? Like, was that did you pin him in at the very beginning?
Yeah.
Spock's my one. You did.
Spock's
okay.
My one. Mm-hmm. Oh man, it's tough. I loved again. We talked about character arc. That is definitely a big factor into what goes where characters go where for me. So definitely a big character arc for me. Why Spock for you?
Spock for me, he was number one right for me. It's a no-brainer. To me, Spock sort of, when you boil it all down, he kind of is he is, in a nutshell, his character journey, like we've been talking about all day. All these characters, one of the you said it yourself, like the search for identity, like who am I? Mm-hmm. There's an element to that in a lot of these characters. We talked about 7 and 9 kind of being like the most like, this is who the character is, like this is what they're doing from the ground up. Quite a few of these characters, some of the best Star Trek characters, are dealing with an element of like finding a comfort zone and dealing with two sides of a personality and figuring out who they are. Yeah. And Spock is certainly the most obvious example of that. And when you think about his presence in the show, I mean, he's in the cage at the very, very beginning, the first Star Trek that was ever produced, like the first idea of Trek, he's there. He's in it through the Kelvin timeline. The most recent movie, Star Trek Beyond, is dealing with that character. Star Trek Discovery is dealing with that character. He's just so present. He's in TNG and Unification.
Yeah.
Nimoy's performance is just like this behemoth thing that like hovers over the whole thing of Star Trek. He made that big of an impact.
Yeah.
I just, he's so representative to